which is a summary of the Tallamy book, Bringing Nature Home. If you haven't read it, you might enjoy picking up the summary and then checking the book out of the library. We have a Prairie Nursery catalog. You say, what? Prairie Nursery is out of Wisconsin. They grow native plants. It's also an ecological gardening guide, and it has so much information. If you don't look at it this summer because you're too busy, set it on your coffee table until January. It's eye candy, and you will just dream about what you can do in your garden. It has information on roots, sunlight, moisture, and that's how we want to use it. I am not paid by them. We get no remuneration. They're a wonderful company, but I'd rather you buy local. But they are kind enough to send these to me for my educational workshops. Last month, we had David Mizejewski as our speaker. He is the naturalist for the National Wildlife Federation. He has a book that he wrote. I bought 25 books to make them accessible to you. They're $19.99 if you buy them from the National Wildlife Federation, but you can buy them tonight for $15. So if you are interested in one of these, we have them available. So those are books you can take with you, not mine. I just want to make sure that's clear. So we are so grateful for the many hands that work diligently to offer this hybrid programming. It's not been easy for us, and the Mills Community Health offered us such a wonderful venue. They have the infrastructure for us to plug ourselves into, and we're always looking for people to add to our leadership team, always. We meet in October, and we will start planning for next year. And this program that we're having tonight came out of that last year's October program when they said, we're tired of people just taking a bunch of seeds, throwing them in their lawn, and having a native mess. We need to know about landscaping. And so here we are learning about landscaping. Upcoming events. Tomorrow, we were to be touring the botanicals. We have been looking at weather reports. We are expected to have thunderstorms. Rather than have everybody drive to the garden, we're going to reschedule for September 6th. This is really late notice. I'm really sorry. We're going to have to reach out to a lot of people online and let them know it's been rescheduled. September 6th, 10 to 12. Matthew will give us a tour at the Botanic Gardens. If you haven't been there, this is a not miss opportunity. It's gorgeous. You can go on your own, but to have him there talking about it will really be an enriching experience. On August 23rd, we have a field trip with Paula Driesen at Arcadia Marsh. This is one of our annual walks. Paula is so generous to do this for us, the Conservancy, and Benzie Audubon. So we'll have her as a knowledgeable birder with us as well. And you'll learn so much about smartweeds, which just cracks me up. What a name. One of our other brainstorm is we wanted to know more about invasive species, and ISN has been doing a series of invasive plant hikes throughout the region this summer, and they're going to be here at Railroad Point, you know where that is, off of Molyneux Road, on September 20th. So there's a lot happening. Finally, our last program, our hoo-ha for the year, is September 20th, and it's Climate Change and Trees. Maddie Bartoli and Ellie Johnson and the A-Trip people about moving trees from southern climes up to northern climes will be that presentation. So we hope you will tune in and show up for these. There are two other things that I really think you should know about, is that Douglas Tallamy, the author of the 3-4 books that are up there, will be in Elk Rapids on August 24th. Green Elk Rapids is bringing him in, and he will be speaking. It's open to the public. I think there's a $10 donation. if the people who admire Doug and haven't heard him and want to hear him all show up, there's going to be a crowd. So if you can get there, I encourage you to do that. Have I missed anything? I got the change date, right? Yeah. Okay. So now I'm done. We're going to do a little technology flip over to move to Matthew Ross. He is the executive director of the Botanic Gardens at Historic Barnes Park. How long have you been there? Not yet 2 years? 16 months. Okay, he's new to us. He comes with a plethora of experience in horticultural and botanic garden areas from Ohio East, right? He has taken the Botanic Gardens by storm. It's really exciting to see what's going on at the gardens with Matthew on board. So let's welcome Matthew Ross. Here's your dongle. Yep.
All right, everybody. Can you all hear me? Hopefully you guys can all hear me online. And thank you, Cheryl, for a great introduction. I am glad to be here representing the Botanic Garden at Historic Barnes Park. Quick show of hands. I know you guys online can't show me your hands, but if you want to put it in the chat, and everybody here, how many people have been to the Botanic Garden? Awesome. If you end up showing up tomorrow, I will put you to work because we're a volunteer-based organization, and we will be doing that tour on September 6th that I hope all of you can attend. And we're going to have some fun tonight talking about landscape design. I'm going to be giving you guys some tips. As Cheryl mentioned, I've been in the botanical garden and public garden world as well as academia for quite some time. And wanted to let you know my journey with native plants started with, well, didn't necessarily start, but was really enhanced by a woman named Denise Gehring out in Toledo. And some of you might know her work from the Toledo Metro Parks. And of all the places to fall in love with native plants, you normally don't think of Northwest Ohio. But it's really beautiful if you've never been to the Oak Openings, and it was really eye-opening, and that's really where I started taking my experience from loving the outdoors and putting it into the landscape. At Toledo Botanic, we had a Maumee Valley Natives program that I was very active in. We grew a lot of plants on site and installed many, many rain gardens. And I had a philosophy when we built out our college campus that we built with our students. It was edible, native, or both. So a pretty cool exercise there. I then translated that experience out to Longwood Gardens, and I was there for about 9 years, or just shy of 9 years, and had a fantastic career at arguably the nation's most prominent garden. And I was really, really glad to see that there was a position here back in Traverse City where I could come back to my home state and get a chance to have a positive impact and bring the knowledge that I learned on the East Coast and in Ohio out to our region that I call home. So why? Many of you are here because you already know why. You love native plants. They provide incredible habitat for our fauna. They are nectar sources, pollen sources, host plants. They're also very beautiful. A lot of times you get that really good feeling when you plant a native plant and you see the host plant that you just planted give life to the next generation of pollinators, something that we all need more of. And I hope you all join Doug Tallamy on August 24th with Green Elk Rapids to hear his message and how important and how vital the work that all of you are doing in your home gardens and how vital that work is for our nation and for the animals that live within our nation as well. So a lot of people ask why. Well, why not? Because we live in nature's absolute most beautiful shoreline anywhere in the country and arguably in the world. And it's hard when you get a chance to walk in a place like the side of Sleeping Bear Dunes that you don't fall in love with the native flora that we have. So when you see those Junipers virginiana growing in absolute blow sand on the side of a sheer dune, or the big blue stem or the little blue stem, and you look a little bit deeper and you start exploring the flora, and you notice there's a lot more than just the grasses and the junipers in the background. There's things like pitcher's thistle, bearberry, aromatic asters, zigzag goldenrod. They have fun names, some of them. and you really get a chance to understand the community that you're surrounded by. And it's my job and the job of us at the Botanic Garden to reach out and try to emulate that same experience that you get on the edge of Sleeping Bear Dunes and then bring that back into our garden. So many of you might not have noticed this garden, especially if you haven't been at the garden since October of last year. This is a relatively new space. This is our Native American medicine wheel garden, and we worked with members of the tribe, the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians. We worked with traditional knowledge keepers and a landscape architect that's on our board, Maria Tucker, myself, and then a plant expert that many of you know because she lives not far away from here, Laurel Varan. And we came up with a very beautiful design for not just the medicine wheel itself, the surrounding foraging meadow. But we're not new to native plants. Our garden started about 9 years ago with Kurt and Karen Schmidt, and they had the vision to highlight the plants that are native to the Great Lakes. And nearly all the plants that are in this garden are native to the Great Lakes or some of our surrounding states just a little bit to the south. And this garden is absolutely stunning. It's one of the ones that captured my attention when I was looking and doing my research about where I was going to be headed for the next phase of my career. And I felt totally captivated by the Queen of the Prairie, the bergamot, the blue stem, and that beautiful historical water feature coming out of our former silos. But one of the really beautiful moments of my time last year at the gardens, my first year, was capped off during the migratory season that's upon us right now. We're going to see if this works.
Yep. Oh, look at them all. Look at them all.
Oh, wow. Oh.
Yeah.
It brings joy to my heart to be able to see 158 monarchs in a 5x5 square that we counted over a 1 hour period in a time when they're endangered. When an insect that I grew up going to Point Pelee seeing in masses has suffered over 90% loss, it's evident by the fact that this was once an area that was dominated by brome grass and now brought back to Liatris, butterfly weed, and many others, that they're the most critical area for these amazing insects. So how do you translate it back to your home? We'll talk a little bit about it. But if you want something that looks like this, why not copy directly off of us? Because we copy off Mother Nature and then just put that in your garden. So you got a lot of Liatris, Echinacea in here. There are some non-natives with Calamint, but this was a garden that was inspired by the scene that you just saw. So a couple top tips. We're going to go on a journey here today. I used to teach design at the collegiate level. It's a 15 or 16 week course. You didn't know that. You just signed up for getting that entire course in a 1 hour period. So if your brain hurts at the end of the day, it is being recorded. You can check it out afterwards. We'll have that on the website for you guys as well. So the very first thing to do is to define your design intent. And Cheryl mentioned earlier, one of the challenges we have in the native plant movement is that oftentimes we get seen as people that just grab some seeds, throw them on the ground, see what happens, edit a little bit, but mainly it does not always look as a manicured landscape that fits in with everybody else's, right? Is anybody suffering with that right now? You'll notice my hand is also up. I have what I'm calling the nursery at my home in Interlaken, and that was anything I could grow by seed or plug or get, I put in my garden. And I did do some design elements that helped. One of the best things you can do is create edges, right? But I also had something that I encourage all of you to think about today, and that's a defined design intent statement. What is your garden going to look like? What is it going to feel like? What do you want people to go home at the end of the day and say, wow, I went to Kim's Garden, and at Kim's Garden, it was amazing. There was every butterfly I've ever seen in Michigan coming in, landing, having a nectar source, and flying, and it was just this massive, beautiful garden. Or maybe it's Gary's, and Gary's is in a very small area, and it's just a potted container, and Gary's design intent statement is to add one bit of color, one bit of joy for at least one insect or pollinator. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. Doing your homework. I know I'm a teacher. I know that homework still probably has some PTSD for many of us in the audience, but it really does help if you set yourself up to succeed. And the number one thing you can do is to go outside and see what happens in nature. There is not a better garden designer or landscape architect than Mother Nature herself. She does it better than any of us ever could or will do, but gives us the secrets just by going outside our doors. Doing a soil analysis. How many of you can shyly show your hands or not show your hands? How many of you have done a soil test at your house? Okay, we're at 10% of the audience. I'm not calling you out, but if you want to make one big change in your garden, if you find out what you're working with, right? I talk to friends that are artists and they're like, that would be like not knowing what canvas you're going to use and you just try to throw paint on it and it doesn't stick, right? So your soils analysis is pretty critical. Characterizing your site conditions, just go for a walk and write down notes. Many of you probably already do this. It helps to go out with a legal pad and just write down some notes. We can talk a little bit about bubbles. Bubbles are just essentially organizing space for what its function is in the landscape. And that's where a lot of us go wrong when we just start casting out seed. Because we don't necessarily think about how we're going to use the space, how we're going to walk through the space, where our barbecue grill is going to go, right? Where that sauna you've always wanted is going to go.
Do we need to go wash
Traditional
dishes?
Design techniques. There's
Paul?
not an absolute rule book on how to garden,
We need to
but
go
there's
wash dishes.
some lessons that can be learned by looking at some of the
My sister's
classical
over there.
design
Yeah.
I
elements.
was.
Oh, you watched
And you
it?
select based on plant
are.
communities,
Oh,
buy from trusted
Thank God.
sources that Cheryl was just talking about earlier. Got a couple local ones that I use. Balance your design based on height, seasonal blooms, watering requirements. Don't stop designing after you plant. We all probably fall victim to this. You put it in and you're like, okay, it's going to stay in stasis. I planted my Coreopsis tripteris right here, and that's where it will forever be. I planted this partridge pea over here. That's where it forever will be. You have the ability to edit and play the matchmaker, right? If something doesn't like where it's at, maybe you go and try to figure out why and try it in another place. Or you have the ability to edit when your Rudbeckia gets totally out of control, because it's the one thing in the seed mix that did really, really well. I know this. I'm going through it at the Botanic Garden right now, trying to establish a warm season meadow by hand weeding and not using herbicides. It's a very tricky thing, and we're constantly designing. And never believe the naysayers. They're going to tell you that you can't do something and prove them wrong. They're going to tell you this plant can't grow in this area, prove them wrong. So where does it all begin? That design intent statement. How many of you have actually written down a statement about your garden? Okay, got one or two. So one of the best things you can do to help your garden is just write down what you want it to be. So it could be a 1 to 2 sentence narrative of what you want that garden to be. This is your guiding principle from all decisions. So far too often, we just go to the store, we see a really cute plant, we're like, ooh, goat's root, I love that. Let's see how that does. I'll bring that home. I got a Leotris, I got a straight bark maple. I'm this guy, I'm talking about myself right now. And then you come home and you're like, where is it all going to go? But by having that design intent statement, it might have said at the beginning of the day, right? When I went out to the plant nursery, I'm looking for these particular plants. I'm interested in this particular look. And if that plant doesn't fit the design intent statement, we give it to a friend so we can enjoy it at their house, right? This also sets the stage for formality, bed lines, plant selection. And then I say services provided to, which is maintenance, right? And by the landscape, what you get back in return. So many of you might have had a chance to go out and see our labyrinth garden and walk that amazing healing space. And in that space, the design intent for it, the exterior area around it was to choose primarily native plants and or cultivars. We do use cultivars. I'll have a whole talk about that anytime you guys want. But that at some point in time in their life, they have red in their color, either their leaves. We have Dervila, which has that fiery red color. We have Achillea that you see here. We have Pachyra aurea that turns red in the fall. Echinacea paradoxica is the only one that the deer don't eat. So that's why that's there. But most of the plants in that area, it's focused on red to then harken back to the healing properties of the hospital itself on the red spires. This garden right here, what do you think the design intent statement might be? Anybody want to take a crack at it? What are we trying to convey here? What was that? The flowing, right? The flowing nature. Yep. If I was to sum this up in one sentence, it would be display garden showing the versatility of Great Lakes Northern and Northern Michigan native plants. Right? So when I go to the store, right, and I go to that store and I see a plant, and I'm like, oh my God, I'd love to see that. That would be perfect right next to the flowing water of the silo. Unfortunately, it doesn't meet the design intent that we have of trying to exemplify Great Lakes Northern and Northern Michigan natives, because that plant is from Asia or Europe or another part of the world. So we don't bring it into the garden. You see how I use the design intent as a filter? Is that helpful for some of you? It gives you the justification to say no sometimes. Let's do another one. So the area around the Native American medicine wheel garden, we're calling the foraging meadow. This is a garden that we're designing with input from members of the Grand Traverse Band. And they've been out helping us. And I had one of the best statements ever was from one of the traditional knowledge keepers who said, you're spending too much time focusing on the individual plants. If it's native, it would have been here. We would have used it. But the design intent of this space is to show off or display the ethnobotany of the region and plants that are traditionally harvested for medicinal, spiritual, or culinary purposes. Does that make sense? And just by having that concise design intent, that then lets me know what I want to aim to strive to have in that garden. This is another project that I worked on in Pennsylvania. If you guys ever get a chance to go to Downingtown, it's right near Philadelphia. This is a former site of the mill where they made the Union jackets for the Civil War, where they made Jeep interiors during World War I, and where they made everybody's favorite pair of pants, leather, in the 1960s. Sadly, the mill and pleather, not as popular, went defunct, and for about 65, 70 years, this site was left barren. The community then started making a park and walking trails and guided trails throughout it. And we then took it to the next step, and we decided to turn it into a space for education and art in a natural setting. So there we use the term natural setting. That gives us the platitude to use both native and cultivar plants that are here, cultivated plants. Here's the amphitheater. Got a lot of really interesting plants going on here. The amphitheater's walls are surrounded by red buds. So when they bloom, you'll have a cascade of purple colors going all the way back into the woodlands. We've got zigzag goldenrod. We have a couple of the smaller plants in there are different heucheras. We have fetterbush and all kinds of other fun plants there. This is what the front of that property looks like. And we had a great conversation about soils, right? So going back to the beginning, here we have this mill, most likely had quite a bit of contaminants in the soil. So we had to remove a lot of it and then come back in with engineered soils. Well, when you bring in engineered soils, they're relatively biologically dead or limited in terms of their organic matter content. They're mixed with gravel, and they're an incredibly inhospitable environment, even for the toughest of native plants. So when we looked at what we wanted to use in this plant palette, we went to sumac, we went to sourwood, or black gum. We went to grasses and sedges, baptisias, plants that live on scree or floodplains. And that was what helped dictate what we were going to use. Okay, the design intent of this garden. How many people have ever heard of a place called Stoneleigh, a natural garden? Yep, Cheryl has. This is out in Villanova. And you're noticing here, there's a wide range of plant material shown off in a very unique way. So Ethan Kaufman, their executive director, is arguably one of the greatest plantsmen in our community out there and arguably across the nation. And he focuses on a lot of plant collection, and obscure woody plants are his bag. So they have the platitude to use any plant they want along the mid-Atlantic, both in its natural form and its cultivated form. And the gardens here are meant to inspire using plants native to North America. Not far away in Delaware is Mount Cuba Center. How many of you have ever been to Mount Cuba? Wow. How many of you have social media? This is one you want to follow. So right down Mount Cuba Center in Hockessin, Delaware, they do a native plant trial, which is critical for our industry. The other thing about this garden is that it was once designed and was a very formal garden that in the 1980s switched and went to natives. So they tore out classically designed garden beds, but left the infrastructure and then have used native plants to fill back in. There's still a couple non-natives. There's a historic collection of lilacs, but for the most part, they are exclusively plants that are native to the Piedmont region. So their mission or their design for the gardens here are a place to explore the Piedmont. So you're looking at plants from all across the Piedmont, as well as trials of cultivar selections of plants like hydrangea, arborescens, echinacea, sedges. They did a huge sedge trial. All of their trials are 3 years in length, and they mix both species and cultivars and are doing the critical work to determine the impact that it has on our insects and pollinators. So really great work. They've been doing it for many, many years, but they also have quite a strong science outreach. Okay, doing your homework, field botany. How many of you feel like this is field botany? So some of us might, but we are in a new era. And while our herbarium specimens do give us a great link to the past, field botany can be pretty fun too. And you can see things like you've never seen before, like Cypripedium macaulay's or the showy pink lady slippers, and mass here with Peter Zale, the curator at Longwood. It's one of the oldest fields of science, herbalism and determining what might be edible, poisonous, or have a utilitarian use. Pretty interesting if you look back in history and you're like the guy that had to determine whether or not black snake root was going to kill you or not. Pretty interesting stuff, how they did dosage and found out by learning from nature and learning from traditional knowledge and passing that down what has use. Theophrastus is thought of as the father of botany and an inspirational founder of the modern botany with his compendium Historia Plantarum. And that's really when we started looking at plants as being medicine in the newly developed world. And then the earliest herbals were the Hippocratic corpus. And pretty interesting reads if you ever get a chance to see some of the work that's been done way, way back in the day. But they felt that exploring the natural world was the way that we would unlock being able to have medicines, to have agriculture, to have food, to have ceremony. All of that was wrapped up in plant life. It was the center of the universe. It still is. Our iPhones have nothing on plants when it comes to giving us sustenance, right? And it's also a great way to enjoy spending time with your family members, like my nephew here, who got a chance to see that beautiful yellow plant. Does anybody know what it is? Hoary Cocoon, I heard it. Hoary Cocoon, right? One of my favorite plants to say. It's a lot of fun. Kids always giggle. And here he is out exploring some sand dunes. How's field botany different than just going for a hike? It's all about your intention. Helps you expand your knowledge. You can do a botanical blitz and see as many plants as you want, take as many photos as you want. And although they're not our sustenance, they also are a really good source. If you have an iPhone and you just go to look up plant, it gets you close. It's not going to get you all the way there. You're not going to figure out the species. There's still definite use for a field guide, but there's a way that you can capture as many plants as possible. You might have a botanical bucket list. Does anybody have one? Like, I want to see all the native plants in Michigan before I die, right? What's on your botanical bucket list? Is it Ram's Head orchids? Up there? Yep, check. We'll talk later. Because that's on mine. One of mine is going out and seeing the swamp pinks and the New Jersey pine barrens, a pretty amazing plant. Like really awesome. But when you're out there exploring, one of the things you have to think about as a designer is using a critical eye. So what are the plants that I'm seeing now that could work in the landscape? Not all of them are already available. So having conversations with Garrett, Blythe, and Matt and many others, and saying like, I'd really love to show off Marsh scutellaria because it's an awesome plant and nobody in the nation grows it. right? There's a lot of plants that are out there that aren't being used because they don't traditionally fall into plants that would work for the nursery industry. Normally distance isn't your goal. Me and Ethan here, we had a great day. We went about 1.5 miles and saw more in that 1.5 miles than I've seen if I would have walked 30 miles because I was with an expert. And you're normally not as fast paced. If you hike and you have hiking friends, they might not always be your friends at the end of the hike if you've only gone 1/4 mile. Okay, just a couple ground rules. Make sure you stick to the path, especially during hunting season. Collect samples only when permitted. And you guys know all this because you guys go out and do this. Make sure you bring enough water for the journey. I did dune climb last May and had that jug right there. It might not have been enough. I always wear orange. As soon as fall hits, I'm wearing my fluorescent orange. I look ridiculous, but I've only been shot at once. And that was in New Jersey, surprisingly, at the Pine Barrens. But it also makes a good marker so you can have things like the Drosera. Okay. And although it looks pretty comical, you probably know this, never take the height, width, and spread maximums as the gospel truth. Michael Durr has a fantastic book on the woody plants that are out in the landscape. But when they say things like sweet bay magnolia is only going to get 15 foot tall and 15 foot wide, and you go out there and you see one in the primordial forest. This is in Bear Swamp, also in the Pine Barrens, and you see one that's 80 feet tall and 60 feet wide. It does blow your mind. Plants don't read, so they don't know how big they're supposed to get. You just use it as a guideline. And also, when you go out into nature and you start looking, there's so many things out there that we have that are natural variants that are not represented in the landscape. Some of that's for the good. Some of it could be a way to get people into planting native plants. Like when you see a Prunella vulgaris fully variegated, certain people get really excited about that. Another lesson from the field is don't forage too close to the paths. It's always fun to find blueberries, cranberries, and everything in between. But if you're too close to the path, our four-legged friends might have already been there before you and added a bit of marinade. And timing is everything. This was a photo of me, Phil Collins, and some Plantatheras, or white-fringed orchids that I saw in Pennsylvania. I was there a week before. There was absolutely nothing in bloom. So you could be walking by an entire acre full of nothing but orchids, and you might miss them. And they show up in the weirdest places, including on the sides of electrical corridors. Remember to dress for all occasions. And sometimes you're not hiking in our area. A lot of times, the best botanizing is done by kayak or boat. If you don't have the time to go out and you want to know if something's native, we have a fantastic resource, and it kills me as an MSU alumni to give Michigan credit for anything. This is one I will give them massive credit for. The herbarium is incredible. So if you haven't used the herbarium, it's a really good source. So if you were wondering, is Salix alba or white willow native to Michigan, they will tell you what counties they have seen it in, and they will tell you things like this plant is incredibly promiscuous, but it was first collected in 1881. It was a tree introduced from Europe and locally naturalized. So this does give you the first notation in the botanical record of the state, and also tells you whether or not it's been brought in or naturalized. So many things that we think of as being exclusively native to Michigan are not. There's only one plant that is exclusively native to the geopolitical boundary of the state of Michigan. Does anybody know what it is? It grows not far away from here. Mimulus michiganensis, or the yellow Michigan monkey flower. It's the only plant that is only in Michigan, and it's adorable. It's also imperiled, but you can see it in Glen Lake at the Founders Park. There's an area that actually points it out, has a sign, and shows you exactly where it's at. Okay. We're going to move on to a little bit more of the heady science, and then we're going to have some fun. This is an ecoregion. How many of you have ever looked at an ecoregion map? This is for the true nerds in the audience that love geology and understanding why plants grow where they do. You can also check the USDA soil map, and even Google Earth will give you a little bit of information about your location. If you look at where we're at, we're glacial. So if you look just around Traverse City, there's about 5 different ecoregions within about a half an hour drive. And a lot of that's because glacial till and the glacial movement dictated the fact that if you're on the coast, you're going to have the sandiest of sandy soils. And if you're just a little bit further over, it gets chalkier, heavier, thicker, and so forth. It also lets you know, like when you look at things like Cadillac and that little divot that you see there, that is mainly colder there, snowier there, and has heavier soils because that's where some of the fallout after the main sand and rocks fell out on the coast. A lot of that fell out down to Cadillac and created that bowl where they get all that snow, cold air, and they have a little bit shorter season. Many people would view them as being like a zone 5 solid or 5A, and many people would view us in the 5B to 6A category when it comes to USDA hardiness. So it all starts with the soil. So the first thing you do when you buy a new house in Interlochen is you dig up the entire front lawn. That's what I did. And then you run a soil test and find out, yes, exactly what you suspected. Being next to a lake that's sandy, you have sandy soils. But it did also tell me how much organic matter I had and a little bit more about what happened. By putting a shovel on the ground, I was able to realize a lot of the soil was brought in outside of my region just by looking at the layers and the formation. And that's because this is right near where my septic field is. So I've created a warm season meadow above the warm season pipes of the septic field. You can go online. In 1935, they passed this ordinance for the soil stabilization in the United States because they were in Congress, and a giant black cloud flew across and blackened out all of Washington, D.C. And they said, man, we should probably check out what's going on with soil. So you can type your address into this little resource, and it will tell you everything you ever wanted to know about your soil. It is a bit clunky, but you have just about 100 years of soil data that's all digitized, and your tax dollars pay for it. So you might as well get something for your taxes and learn more about your soils. So just wanted to throw that out there. This will tell you about your soils pre-development. Yep, if you just search USDA Web Soil Survey, it can be a little tricky. There is a help function on there where I'm going to give you my email at the end, which maybe I don't want to do because many of you might call me about the challenges that you have on their website. If you hit the green button and then go to what they call area of interest and type in your address, it should give you a visual of where your address is and then information about your soils. If you want to dive deeper into it, any extension agent should be able to pull this up for you as well. And that's going to tell you what your soil should be. It also tells you the depth of your water table. It tells you a bunch of information. If you're looking to buy property for agricultural purposes, it can tell you whether or not it's a good idea. It's a really good tool. So we did all that. We did all the boring stuff on our soils, which I find fascinating, but I know not everybody loves soil as much as I do. And now it's time to do a site analysis. This is very helpful. You just walk the site, you write down what do you have there as existing vegetation, where do you have access, what are your sunlight patterns, where's your dominant winds, do you have any pervious surfaces, and you end up with something that looks a little bit like this. Boom. I wish this was my house too, because this is out in Ireland, but it was a friend's home that I got a chance to design and help design with, and pretty fun stuff. But this is the type of things that you're looking for. Where are your utilities? Where do you have turf? Where's your drainage going? Where's the setback for the house? What type of vegetation do you have? What type of trees are there? And what part of the house is shaded? So it might look a little bit different for some of us. Here we have our garage, our residence, and just simple things like it's windy here. There's a slope going down to the north. This is where it's wet. This is where it's dry. Just doing that simple mapping takes you half an hour and help set you up for success when you figure out where you want to have your landscape beds. Then you take that and you use the power of the bubble, and it looks like this. So this is on top of that site analysis. These are the different areas of compartmentalized functions within the garden. So you'll see things like, I want to have a lawn for my dogs, right? I need to have screening here. I want colorful accents in the front of the house. This is where I want to entertain, and I want to have a pond for frogs. This area was wet when I did my site analysis, and I realized it was a slope. So I have a wet slope, and I put that in there. I want an informal wetland vegetation to help kind of grace through that area. And then at the end, I want some screening because I might have a neighbor there I don't want to have looking right back at my entertainment area. Does this all make sense to everybody? Just bubbling out where you want stuff. It can be really helpful. It can also be really dismaying if you do this and then you realize, oh, that's where my septic field is, which is part of what I had the pleasure of doing in Interlaken. Then you can integrate in some of the traditional landscape elements. So define your style. Do you want your garden to be formal? Right? And here, this is Cranbrook. Very, very formal exotic plantings in the middle, but actually some formal native garden beds all the way around the outside. Part of that garden's majesty of the parterre there is that as you sit in the center, it's incredibly formal, and then it kind of fades away to the natural landscape around you. Okay? Or you could be totally informal like Donald Pell. Also, if you guys do social media, you want to follow Donald Pell for hilarity. He's awesome. He's a designer out in Malvern, Pennsylvania. And he does kind of a Pete Udoff-esque design, mixing very aggressive native plants to fight back invasives. That's kind of his bag. So he's like, I want to have the most aggressive plant in the garden going through first and fight off anything I can. He uses a lot of seed mixes that are what most people would view as gasoline on the landscape, is what I call it, where it's like these plants are just going to rip through the area. And he's like, that's exactly what I want them to do. Right. And does some really, really inventive things. He does mix a lot of exotics in, or some exotics in, but mainly is a strong native palette. You can also define your style. Just because it's a native garden doesn't mean it can't be formal or can't be fun, right? Because a lot of people, they view a lot of native landscaping as seeds down, meadow, and that's it. But there's a lot out there. So when I see that curvilinear bed, there are some exotics in there, but that's at Crystal in Seattle. You have Arctangent there. That rectilinear design is at Stoneleigh. The freeform design that you see on the back side of that is a green roof that is all Allium cernuum or nodding onion. It's awesome, right? You want a statement. You want to show people that nodding onion is a cool plant in the landscape. Do a whole roof of it and then let it seed out into the landscape. Really, really creative work that Andy Brand and the team are doing up at Coastal Maine. Or a curvilinear bed that's got native plants around it, like what we're doing here at the Healing Garden at Traverse City. Does anybody know what this is, what this represents? Looks like a shell, right? If I do a straight aerial view of this, this is the Nautilus, right? So a sphere going all the way down. Beautifully designed. This is Rick Dark, who was the co-author of one of the books with Doug Tallamy, and Tom Smar designed this at the Parklands in Louisville, Kentucky. So there's a drain at the very bottom here. This is a way to handle waste and storm water, right? Very inventive, incredibly formal. All the plants are exclusively native to the region, right? So I've got my heucheras on the side, my sedges going through, and it creates this carpet that draws your eye down. Incredibly formal garden. If you've never been to Parklands, the next time you go to Louisville, Kentucky, go check out, especially this garden. It's a magical passage through the edge of the woodlands. It was designed by Rick Dark and Tom Smar, a really, really cool design. Oh, and there's also goldenrod in there as well, and some xanthorrhiza around it. You can define your style. This, again, goes back to your design intent. This one, I just wanted to show you color, right? You can have all the color you want. Here's yellows, reds, blues, purples, pinks. It could work for some of you, but some of you might have your eyes on something different, like a straight complement that's just green and red. So there I have red bee balm next to Spigelia. Wow, amazing that that person also has a red skirt and a black bag. It's kind of like they're reflected in the landscape. And this I would view as being a very red and green complement design. One of the things that kind of, when I talk to friends, they're like, native plant gardens, let me guess, it's yellow, right? Because there's so much that's yellow out there. But if you just take the yellow of the coneflower here and you just add one little sprig of that verbena right next to it, it changes the whole landscape, right? So I go from being pretty much monochromatic in terms of its yellows and browns, and then I add that pop of yellow to add that complement. It's very, very subtle, which I'm surprised I'm saying verbena is subtle because it's normally not. But by adding that purple in, I get a totally different composition. In the grand scheme of things, if you're doing a complementary color mix, there's a receding color and then a color that has the pop. Which one do you think yellow is? Is it the color that pops or is it the receding? It's the pop. Normally yellow is the pop. So I can do an 80-20 and it still pulls off the complement. 80% purples and blues, 20% yellow, and I've got a wow factor out there, right? If you take home if you don't take home anything else from tonight, I hope you get a chance to think about this Venn diagram. So I use this with my students when I used to teach design, and I looked at an ecosystems approach to landscape design because I wanted to succeed, and I have view that people are part of the equation. So their thought of what aesthetics is important, because if we want to encourage more people to have ecologically responsible gardens, we want them to look good, right? And we want to be beautiful. We want to be surrounded by beauty ultimately, right? So that aesthetics piece is part of it. The ecological services is a huge part of it. The design intent, which we talked about in the beginning, and the function. If any one part of that Venn diagram is off or unbalanced, it could disrupt the whole purpose of why you're doing this garden to begin with. Does that make sense to everybody? So if I don't have a design intent statement and I'm just going, throwing this there, throwing that there, that's fine. That's how most people garden, right? I could change that whole design just by putting down what I want that garden to be in my mind. And it doesn't mean that I have to stop doing onesie twosies and throwing them in, because everybody does that. But it might make me think a little bit differently about what I want that garden to look like long term. Okay. So one of the things I'd look at when I was talking about selection and selecting plants is I select based on plant communities. So where do I look for plants? I look for them at the banks of rivers and streams. I look for them in the shorelines and the beaches, the wetlands, the floodplains, dunes, and forests. I also look for what's thriving in the worst conditions in each of these habitats. Because if it's going to survive in the worst, and I give it better, it's probably going to do better. If it can't survive in the harshest environments, it might not do what I need it to do. And I did a lot of work in the urban environment, and that is heavily compacted soils, poor drainage going one way or the other, inundated with water, and then super dry at other times. I would specifically look for plants that I thought were tough as nails because I wanted them to succeed. Okay. If you haven't been down to walk the Boardman, where the dam used to be, it's absolutely stunning to watch this garden progress, or this landscape progress. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned here, as well as at the shorelines and the beaches, the floodplains, swamps. Has anybody been to Central Michigan's? This is Niederhouse Swamp, or Niedercut Swamp. Really cool place to explore. Paths are a little rustic. It's a Boy Scout camp, and that's a Boy Scout. That's my nephew. But we had a great time checking out the swamp there. We have arguably one of the most picturesque marshes anywhere around in Arcadia, and I encourage you guys to go on that trip. And some really great bogs that survive with really, really poor drainage in some of our wetlands, where you find some of the coolest plants like Drosera, colic root, and lycopods. And of course, I always find myself gravitated to the dunes. I try to go out to Sleeping Bear once a week to catch sunset. When you see things like sand cherry sprawling out here, and you hear someone say, I've got this area that's sandy and there's nothing that grows there other than vinca, you're like, No, there is. And it's beautiful and it's great and it provides ecological services. And you will not be disappointed with this plant compared to Vinca. And in forest, I look for areas where there's pits, where there's vernal pools, where there's areas of fluctuating water. So how does this translate into landscape design is probably the question you're asking. So I was doing a landscape design project for a place called the Creamery in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. They had an area that was a parking lot. As you can see, it's right next to the sidewalk. There's a divot through it, really harsh conditions. There's sheet erosion going all the way through because there's no curb and gutter. So every time it rains and they get a lot of rain there, it just floods on down. And anytime it's dry, it's super, super dry. Plus you add in salt and it's time to play a little botanical CSI. So I need plants that are salt tolerant, variable wet conditions, and the ability to withstand heat and humidity. Mind you, I was living in the mid-Atlantic. We could do the same thing here, but this is just to give you kind of an idea of how to take my field experience and then put that into the landscape. So I recognized salt tolerance, variable wet conditions, and ability to withstand heat and humidity. It was my time to go out for a hike in the coastal community within the floodplain itself. I look for plants with really, really wide distribution. So plants that would be hardy and native to Pennsylvania, all the way down into the Carolinas, right? So I looked at a map. Where do those meet? That's pretty much the Delmarva Peninsula. Areas where I get hurricane force winds, salt inundation, variable conditions all the way across the board. And I also looked at Long Island for some hardiness, but I chose to focus a lot on the Delaware, Delmarva Peninsula. So I went high and low in the salt marshes and had a grand old time looking for plants and looked for what was growing in the worst conditions possible. And I found myself looking at some American holly, common persimmon, which surprised me, alders, birch, summer sweet, and sweet gum. A little bit further back, I found red chokeberry, eastern red cedar, and one of my favorite plants. I know it's not a native in Michigan, but I used it a lot in the mid-Atlantic. And if you have friends out there, they need to get with it because it's an awesome native shrub that can tolerate just about anything, the Baccharis helmifolia. So then I looked at all these plants and determined which ones I would want for that landscape based on the fact that these are plants that thrived in the worst conditions. Does this make sense? I can do the same thing here. I've got a client I'm doing a design for right now. They're right on the edge of Lake Michigan. They have a sandy shoreline that's being inundated with poison ivy. They got the poison ivy out, and now they're worried about erosion. Poison ivy being a native plant, it's also a food source. But really, when I go back to that ecological Venn diagram, when it comes to the human element, not great. So I'm trying to find out what I can use in those areas. So I'm looking for areas that are the harshest conditions along Lake Michigan and seeing what's growing there and building my plant palette from that. Does that make sense? And then I go to trusted sources like Garrett and Blythe over at Bird's Foot, or Matt over at Black Cap, or Brian over at Brian and Tom and the team over at Four Seasons, and have conversations with them. What are your clients using that are right on the shoreline? What's been successful? What do you have that I know has got local germplasm? I'll tell you the Bird's Foot. Today I picked up a flat of the Alberta Dune strain of little blue stem for our garden, and it's stunning. It's glaucous, it's blue, it's really beautiful. And it's not far away from where the gardens are at. It's stress tolerant, and it's a local germplasm. I'm really looking forward to seeing how that does compared to some of the other little blue stem that's not from our region. Then I try to balance my design. Okay, I'm the only one that finds PowerPoint jokes humorous. That's not a typo, that's by design. Yep. So let's talk about this space. I see this garden right here. What are you guys noticing? Let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation. Okay, it's wet. It's a water garden. It's a water feature. What else? I'm sorry, I'm going to drift away from the camera. Purples. So I got purples up here in the front. Louisiana iris. We're clearly not in Michigan. And then behind it, it drops back into some of the other purples as well. Divided into rooms, very formal space. This used to be a tennis court, right? Divided into rooms, and within the space, it's rectilinear, and it's divided into rooms within it. This is a natural filtered pond system. So this doesn't rely on chemicals. It's using native plants to filter out any sediment, debris, and anything that they don't want in the water. What else? Okay, a lot of nice stonework. It's bringing both to the foreground and the background. Do you all feel this is balanced? Show of hands. Not at all. Why are you saying not at all? Okay. So your focus is going to the right-hand side or the right-hand side of the frame because it's taller plants there, more color on that side. Leafy. Yep. So it's asymmetrically off-centered, right? It's not directly on center. Some of that's the photographer's fault. What else? So height is a big thing in balance, right? Who feels it is balanced? Go for it. I like it, is what I heard. Okay, so you're looking at it horizontally, so you're looking at each individual area and being in balance. The pergola in the back. Yep. So you got the pergola in the back. It's height-wise, the water feature, if you were to look at it, is really nicely scaled with the hardscape behind it. So you're like, I'm okay with that being taller over here because I know that thalia one day is going to be massive. Right? So balance again, eye of the beholder. This is Stoneleigh. Okay, balance here. You feel this is balanced. I will help design this, but I will not be offended if you say it's not balanced. And it's really tough because it's a brand new landscape. But there's something I'm trying to show you in this design. Okay, it will be in the future. The tall columns of those plants, matching the tall columns on the building. They bring that building from all the way up here, all the way down to the ground plane. If I would have gone with a plant that would have had a V or would have been a tall, just singular tree, like a lollipop, it would have never brought the building itself down under the ground plane. So he chose this very specific juniper to make that vertical element balance. What about here? This is a technique that I'm going to try to do at the Botanic Gardens. So we're going to all pray together that it's going to thrive and survive and look this beautiful. Okay, it's symmetrically balanced, right? And do you know what that is? That's a fir that they chop the top off. So they topped a fir around 3 foot. If your alternative was a U and that's what used to be there and they tore out the U, that's an interesting way of looking at landscaping, right? So pretty avant-garde way of creating bed lines. Not every tree expert's going to be happy about that one, but here it brings a little bit of balance to the site. This is at Coastal Maine. This is one of the native gardens on your way in from the parking lot. It's hard to tell in this picture. That rock sits about 30 foot above grade. It's humongous. Like you have a big black spruce out in front. You got the big black spruce out in the back and some cottonwoods. So if I look at the plant material, if I just went with low plants, if I just went like, oh, there's a bunch of penstemon that would do well here, and maybe I just do Rudbeckia hirta, I would have a huge size discrepancy. So they used Dervila, 9-bark, and arguably one of the most beautiful sets of Comptonia anywhere I've ever seen. And that's a plant we can grow that not a lot of people use. So Comptonia or sweet fern, you guys all know it. It thrives on neglect and likes really crappy soils. So it's well worth trying. It's sweet fern. They're harder to find because they're not easy to grow in a nursery because a nursery setting, you're giving it the ideal situation. It doesn't like the ideal situation. Yep. And they zip off the shelves. So you want to get on the, don't steal them away from the Botanic Garden, but build the demand. Because really, once you build the demand, then we know that these are plants that we can continue to grow. So here, instead of having a low plant, it's around a 3 or 4 foot shrub or pseudo shrub that fills the area to bring balance to that rock. I said, never believe the naysayers. So there's people that will literally say there are no plants for pollinators during early spring, right? And then I'm like, actually, there's a lot of them out there. We just don't use them in the landscape as much as we should. So golden ragwort, you guys all know that one, Pachyra aurea. There's also Pachyra obovata, which is the western species. We're on the far eastern edge of that one. They're fantastic for pollinators. That's golden ragwort or Pachyra aurea. I'm a convert. I did not like this plant at all because I had to weed it. It does spread voraciously. So I'm giving you fair warning. It makes a great alternative to mulch because you let it go. And if you don't want it to bloom, you can cut the bloom off afterwards. Or if you don't want it to go to seed, you can cut the seed head out afterwards. Wherever its seeds go, it will go. Turns red in the fall, really beautiful plant. And it's not truly an ephemeral. It does keep its foliage for us in Michigan. There's Canada anemone, Virginia waterleaf, which I would love to see sold. And the reason it's not sold and the reason you don't see many of these plants is because they flower before Mother's Day. If you're in the nursery industry, Mother's Day is when people shop. If it flowers before then, it's really hard to find. Yes, sir. Yes. Yep. So these are great alternatives to mulch. They spread like crazy. I think you might find some friends in the audience that might help you out with that. You have mayapple, spring beauty, beautiful, flowers up, dies off. Blue cohosh, caudiphyllum, really, really intriguing plant. If you're a macro photographer and you want to win a native plant flower competition or photo competition, take a macro of this because nobody will know what it is. Blue phlox, they're really, really beautiful. We use the creeping phlox. That's like a one-hit wonder. Like it blooms, it absolutely covers the plant. But why not go with something that's a little bit more refined, does a little bit better in the shade, and kind of add a little bit of fragrance? There's false ginseng, Jack in the Pulpit. Jack in the Pulpit also can spread. So I'm giving you plants on this list that will spread. As you heard about the Canada anemone, the ragwort, Virginia waterleaf does as well. I have friends and we talk about our favorite weeds that we'd rather be pulling these up than pulling up the alternative. And then you hear people say tough soils, tougher plants, right? Well, I don't have good soil, so I'm sticking with what works. If you're interested, this is the ultimate guide to artificial house plants. So these are the naysayers, but I'm saying don't give up and find plants that fight back and thrive in really, really tough soils. So a lot of the design work that I've done has sumac in it. It can be very aggressive. It can be used in the right application, right? I'm not putting this in a highly manicured garden where I want it to stay in one spot ever. The sumac will run and do all the fun things it wants to do. But if I had a 5-acre lot and I wanted something to add a barrier out there that provides habitat for birds, that provides me the opportunity to make my sumac lemonade, or maybe I'm into cooking and I want to try my hand at my own sumac spices, I could use it. I tend to use Copalina more than Typhina, which is shining sumac. It's just a tad bit more refined in the landscape than Typhina. Mountain mint, voracious spreader, right? So the gentleman in the back said Canada anemone spreads like mint. This is mint and will spread like mint, right? So I call it white gasoline. I mix it in with other plants, and you'll see like Donald Pell will use this to force out other plants and then eventually pull it out and plug over it with something that's going to be bigger. Data horse mint, beautiful plant, one of my favorites, totally charismatic. It does have the habit of ghosting you, where it looks absolutely stunning, and the next year you forget where it's at, and it forgets where it's at, and it shows up about 15 foot away, and they have to wait a year for it to bloom, so it's got that biennial nature. Rattlesnake Master is like one of the most underutilized landscape plants. If you have a kid that's under the age of 10, the name alone would sell the plant on the kid. And then you get them out there and they're touching the plant and they're looking at the spiky balls. Super cool plant. Does well with some of the others. It does have a large root system eventually, but an interesting plant. Ironweed, really, really tough. Joe Pyeweed, even tougher. Again, these are plants I'm telling you that like to spread. These are not highly manicured, but if you use them in the right application, whether you're going with a matrix planting and you're having several different plants together or doing large swaths of them, it's much easier. And I would much prefer the areas that we have Joe Pyeweed than brome grass, knapweed, bladder campion, and the likes of bindweed. Butterfly milkweed, Virginia creeper, used sparingly. Asters for late season color, little blue stem switchgrass, and Amsonia, which is technically not native to Michigan. It's native to Arkansas, Oklahoma, but it's been kind of adopted by the native plant movement and is an absolutely stunning plant that works well on the landscape. I also hear people say, I want to have a meadow with a field of only flowering forbs forever with no maintenance. Right? And here we have a wet meadow, and you'll even see in here in just a few years, you're starting to see some woody plants. So the reason that this is a naysayer is because they don't want to have woody plants, but I embrace woody plants in the landscape. And I think about hickory, oaks, American hop hornbeam, ironwood, moosewood, or straight bark maple, and sassafras where I can get it. And then I look for those stalwart shrubs, sumac viburnums, American filbert. Bladdernut is like the unsung hero. Like if people would just start growing more bladdernuts or bladdernuts, really cool plant. Native witch hazel, pagoda dogwood. All these plants, though, there are kind of like caveats, just like every single plant you put in the landscape. Service berries, blueberries, elderberry, buttonbush, spice bush, bush honeysuckle. I can do an entire residential landscape using those instead of things like burning bush, yews, euonymus, boxwood, and get a really beautiful landscape. Then I hear people say grasses are only good for dry, sandy areas. I tell them not to walk, but rush. For twig rush, bulrush, unique sedges, bottlebrush grass, people are actually starting to ask for that now. And in previous years, that was one that was kind of this obscurity that was out there. I think a lot of that goes back to photography and the fact that they're absolutely stunning plants. Some of the blue stems can tolerate some water, and so can switchgrass. And again, caveats on blue stem and switch. In the right application, they can tolerate a little bit more water than what we think they can. I'm not going to be putting them right here. I'm going to be putting them higher up in areas that might get a little bit of overspray. And don't stop designing after you plant. This is a really critical piece. You start with an idea, you do your research, you do the design, you do the construction, you do the implementation, you're doing your maintenance, but don't forget to edit, evaluate, and modify. Designing doesn't stop when your garden goes in. So here we are putting a garden in. So Tara John and students from Pathfinder. And your plants aren't the only plants that want to grow there. So you weed. And what I like to do when I'm weeding is go out and go shopping and then fill the gaps. So to really create that strong matrix around the foraging meadow that we're doing right now, we are on a philosophy of we weed, we create the space, and then we fill the space. We're doing everything we can to try to eliminate competition. We're dealing with an area that for 140 years ago was cleared and they brought in brome grass for fodder for cows, and it has been there ever since. So it's really, really difficult. But by finding the right plants to go in there and act as my mulch, and I'm not using mulch there. I really want these plants to spread naturally. I'm filling in those gaps, but I'm constantly designing. I'm looking for what's succeeding, what's thriving, and then what works well together. And then it's fun to go in and plug those holes and put in new plants. Just wanted to throw this out there. I was a longtime national board member for the Wild Ones organization, and they have native garden designs from communities all across the country. And we're fortunate enough that one of them is in Grand Rapids. So they have a completely free, you don't even have to be a member. You can just go on their website and download a planting design for a residential neighborhood that's using exclusively native plants, straight species. And then there's a series of multiple pages that you can learn more about the staging, phasing of the garden, and why they chose the plants that they chose. Just want to put in a minor plug. September 6th, the day that you guys come out for the rescheduled tour. We also have recess at the gardens. So young professionals happy hour. So if you want to make a day of it in Traverse City and then hang around and get some really good local meat and produce, as well as a drink, we'd love to have you come out for it. We have the upcoming Luminaries and Lanterns Festival. We haven't picked the date yet for fall foraging workshop. That's to be determined. We've got a couple classes with NMC coming up. And we ask if any of you want to get your hands dirty and design and edit and weed alongside us. Every Thursday from 9 to 12, we have volunteer days. And you can come and weed, water, and plant all day, any day, if you just give us the heads up. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now. Hope I did all right on time. I wasn't checking. Any questions from the audience? 15 weeks and 1 hour. You guys are ultimate all-stars. Yes. Purple loosestrife. Okay. Myrtle. Yep. Paccara can do all right with it. Zigzag goldenrod, Canada anemone. You just have to kind of clear out a space for them. You're probably not starting by seed against Vinca. You're looking for a plug or an established plant to go in. And you're going to plant, you're going to overplant because you're just trying to take back that area from the Vinca. So Canada anemone is a good one. Paccara is a good one. I like zigzag goldenrod a lot. It's one of the only goldenrods that does well in shade. Yep. And then do a lot of praying, and you're not going to be done with the Vinca. You're probably going to have to go after it again. Question? Yep. Yeah, so I would look at red. Oh, the question was, yep. Question was, what do I use to replace traditional hedging around a home? Answer is, there's a couple different things. One is you can change the way that you view winter. So if you use winter as a opportunity to have red twig dogwood shine, to have your native grasses in full glory, as long as they can hold on. Ilex verticillata or sparkleberry Michigan holly, really great plant. If you start trying to modifying that and then strategically place things like hemlock, firs, and Juniperus virginiana and Juniperus horizontalis. So if I start using some of those plants strategically, you're not going to have a manicured boxwood landscape. I could do that in the summer, but I could not necessarily give you that full winter interest. If I also look at things like bush honeysuckle, Dervila lanicera, you guys all grown that plant? It'll hold out for a while in terms of its fall color, and then you get the seed heads. It's attractive. It's not a boxwood, but it's going to do well. Yep. Yep, go for it. The free garden design layouts at wildones.org. And you can download it. It's for Grand Rapids, but it has applications for us here in our region. Great. Yes, question. Any advice for a field of spotted knapweed to eliminate it? Well, that's one way. So I was asked about eliminating spotted knapweed. Choke it out with things that are going to be just as aggressive, if not more aggressive. So look at things like silphiums, dotted horsemint can thrive in knapweed situations. And if you go to areas where there's a lot of knapweed, look at what other natives are popping up alongside it. And it's normally dotted horsemint, normally. You can see a little bit of a little blue stem or big blue stem with it. But again, you're not going to start by seed. You're going to a mature plant when you cut down the knapweed. And then looking for plants like compass plant. Some of the silphiums are really, really aggressive. Eventually what's going to happen is you're going to get rid of the knapweed and you're going to be like, how do I get rid of the compass plant? But trying to go at it with more aggressive plants. When I mentioned Donald Pell, he used to do a program for us when I was at Longwood called, the Wild Garden Designed. And he looked at how can I fight nature with nature? So what are the plants that we know spread voraciously? Yep. Pearly Everlasting is another one that does okay with it. But it's a beautiful plant. Pearly Everlasting, awesome plant, or Sweet Everlasting. Really great plants, totally underutilized. Knapweed's tough because if you try to seed against it, it will win every time. So if you try to seed even Black-Eyed Susan, it'll shoot a lot of those Black-Eyed Susans out. It is incredibly laborious. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough one. It's been here for a long time too. That's part of the challenge. Yep. That too. Yep. And I've also noticed, it's interesting you said that with the skin condition. I've noticed right now, and I don't know if it's just me, but keep an eye out for poison sumac too. I talked a lot about sumac. I know the lake that I live on, I'm seeing a lot of it. And like Warren Dunes further south, massive stands of poison sumac. Not to alert you, it's really easy to see the difference. White flowers hanging down versus red flowers up. But it's a beautiful plant. From a distance, you see poison sumac and you're like, my God, this is stunning. But just keep an eye out for it. I've been seeing it. I saw a little bit hiking around Long Lake as well. So the poison sumac is white hanging down fruits and flowers. Yep. Yeah, it's a tough one. Yep. Yep. All right. Well, thank you for having me. I hope to have all you guys come out September 6th.
Thank you, Matthew. Very good.